It is, okay, perfect. I have him out of wonderful. Turn it on. Our microphone now.
This camera at 20 pounds?
Oh.
No, it's just your sweater, Travis. Almost the same sweater and I love it.
Tone of this meeting is
I
gonna.
put on one of my wife's sweatshirts the other day and it kind of fit. She
be-
was a big one, but it was like it's a Sunday fun day or some cute girl thing. I thought it was mine.
You wore that on.
Yeah.
Got out the door with it?
No,
Oh,
I could. It's my Halloween costume. I would wear the
What's your?
whatever you want. I'll wear my wife's sweatshirt.
are we?
What are you doing?
Halloween is my absolute favorite.
What are you doing? What are you?
I don't know, I have to go dive into my giant costume closet. I gotta pick something that won't scare my little 3-year-old niece. 'Cause I got a couple of scary costumes.
I had this wolf mask and our friends have adopted 4 different children from all over the world. And this
All right,
Henry,
we are going to get started. We will call this meeting of the Lexington City Council to order. And we have another meeting with us, needs to open it.
It's 6:32, we'll open the planning commission joint city council meeting.
All right. We are now both open and we will get Maggie to guide us through.
Thank you for being here tonight, you guys. This was a request by the planning commission at our last meeting or maybe the week before. This topic of inclusionary zoning has been on the docket all year. It's kind of been bounced back and forth between council and planning commission, and we're kind of getting nowhere and need some direction from the council as to kind of what's our first step? What do you want us to do? I know we got some comments, RC3, I forwarded those on to you, with some options that they were looking at. We discussed at our last meeting, this is not a one size fits all. Inclusionary zoning is a big topic, and it's not, I think, picking what another jurisdiction has done and trust it. It's very specific to the community. So I'm starting off with that, but the goal of tonight is to give the commission direction. Back to that, commission.
all set.
Yes. Yeah, and just a little bit more clarity. We've looked at a few options for inclusionary housing. Oftentimes that requires some sort of fee collection. And or dare I say tax, on development. So kind of we're just hoping to get some guidance on the comfort level of the council on what avenues we should approach, whether that's capturing fees, and if we are capturing fees, where do these fees live? Are these being housed in the city? Is it the city doling this out for future projects, or are we working with a third party? So there's kind of a lot of gray areas that we were hoping to get at least some guidance, so that we can start putting together some framework of an idea.
The concept of a plan.
Concept of a plan. I didn't want to go there, but you did, so everyone else did.
When you said capture fees, what's that about?
So there are few cities that, based on the type of development, will charge, so if you do not include, affordable housing in your development, there is a fee, usually a percentage of the build out.
Oh, like a fee in lieu.
Cash in lieu of, that's the person. Yeah, that's what I was looking.
Most applications have a fee in lieu of, and my understanding is that almost all developers choose to pay the fee rather than build the house.
Or a bonus program is the other option. So bonus incentives, if you develop an inclusionary portion of your property, you then have the permission to either build outside of current code or
Mhm.
build
Mhm.
additional structures.
Which we do have some incentive in the code already, but it only applies to affordable housing where it is income qualified to less than 50% AMI,
That's.
which is very, very, very low. That's already kind of the affordable housing that we have is like subsidized housing. So a lot of the other provisions from other jurisdictions we've looked at are like 80 and potentially up to 120% AMI would be considered within the like affordable program. And
I think it's one quick step back, just to get a clear picture of. Are we? Who, and I say this in a way, like, who are we creating this for? Like, who is interested, who is looking right now at Leavenworth as a developer to say, boy, if they only had a, right, a program for our size construction company or builder. Are there people in, I mean, is this interesting for anybody, or we're setting these tools up?
this is a penalty.
It's a stick.
This is Like- the other side of
This-
what
this
you're
thing.
talking Yeah. about.
Okay.
Inclusionary zoning is a way that we actually will get
Make.
affordable housing because
Okay.
it's by requiring it being a part of a development, it will actually happen because it doesn't pencil any other way for developers to actually want to do it.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, okay, so that, yeah, so this is a requirement. Yeah. But you said there are some things that we can give. To incentivize them also
So we
in the same breath, right?
We have, where is that?
That's already in the code, like you said.
Yeah, we
so
have
already
something already in the code that's like, if the housing is deed restricted to be, reserved for people who are 50% AMI or
Yeah.
less, then you get certain density bonuses, you can reduce the amount of parking required. There
Yeah.
are
But nobody's used it
bonuses
yet.
to the developer. Nobody has used it.
Yeah.
Probably partly because the threshold is so low, and in that code, there's actually like a clause that says the city council can choose to bump this up to be used for a higher threshold, like 80% instead of 50. To have those incentives, but the problem is that even with those incentives, it generally doesn't pencil out. So you have to, so we're saying we need to take the next step of just requiring that people provide affordable housing or a fee that will support affordable housing, because otherwise it's just not
Got it.
going to happen. The incentives are not significant enough.
Well, that's, yeah, okay.
See, we got a target, to my way of thinking, our target is the 80 to 120%. That is our workforce housing population. And that's the one that needs it the worst, so it's gotta. And that's why I figured this was a discussion that we should have, why, whenever I recommended that, we get down and sit down with each other and talk this out instead of separate groups. Cause it is it's a huge topic and it's hard to get a handle on. But I'm thinking, if we do, in my perspective, that's the target we want, is 80 to 120%. That's what it means. So, yes, I want to kind of clarify, if there's two things you can look at. You can look at cash in lieu, I guess. You don't build it, but you pay this. And then so if we do that, does that mean like they get higher density out of that thing? They're able to build denser, or they just pay the money? Just pay the money.
That's a straight tax. Yeah.
Okay, straight across. And if we say, okay, that's not the option, the option is you're gonna build 25% of your structures, affordable in perpetuity. Do I understand that right, that they can make things denser or closer together, put more buildings in?
Mhm.
That's right, okay.
We
But
can
that-
do whatever we want.
Yeah, we can make that call.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like right now, a developer could say, like, I want to use the incentives in the code, and I wanna build one more unit on this property than I would be able to
Mhm.
otherwise. They can do that if they have a deed restriction saying, it's actually, the threshold is 50% AMI, or, yeah, county median income. For renters and 80% for owners.
Hmm.
But then there's a section that says the city council may increase through a public hearing the threshold to 80% AMI for renters and 100% for
Property owner.
owners. So you could just, whenever the council chooses, you could adjust that to have a higher threshold and still have these. But the thing is, nobody is using this. And if,
Or even asking about it.
Right.
yeah,
It's not even. on-
there's
Yeah.
no real interest, so it's like, this is
Why
the
is
carrot, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
there's the carrot and the stick, like, the carrot is out there,
There's a
but
big.
we also need a stick.
We're in an
And
inelastic,
maybe someone could use those in combination.
like, we're in an inelastic market, so like our market is very inelastic. That's part of the reasoning why there's no incentivization for people to build affordable housing, so unless we adopt a relatively strict path. That's where we come into this point where we need to collaborate with the council to make this decision. It
The
is,
AMI rate is based on the county,
and then. In the AMI though, the spread 80 to 120 is now 67,000 to 1,000.
James, say it again, James.
The
60?
AMI in the county is 84,020. That's the estimated value that the state published. And if you take that and you spread that out, 80 and 120, that's 67,000 and 101,000. Teachers barely qualify for.
Additional
Hmm.
some cities are using some additional incentives, things like streamlined processing. Fee reductions, so waiving some of the administrative fees for development. Tax abatement, so there's potential to also look at waiving some local municipality taxes. Density bonus, so ability to create more density within the zone. Parking reduction, probably not very popular here. So those are some of the carrots.
Have we talked to the developers? What do they want? What do they care about?
They basically, I mean, from the few that we've heard from, they're like, if you mandate, affordable housing, like if you say there's no fee in lieu,
Yeah.
it has to be, then they're like, well, we won't do it. then.
Yeah.
We won't build it
So what are we doing?
for you.
Well, we haven't tested that, right?
Yeah, I
Just
mean, we
'cause
haven't,
they say it doesn't mean it's
Okay.
true.
Right, they'll always say it if they
Okay.
keep
But
from.
that's where, you know. 25% probably high,
Yeah,
but it's really hard to know what that sweet spot is, right?
yeah. But we messed around with different calculators and PC meetings, and it's basically like, it doesn't
Functionally,
pencil functionally. So that's why, you know, there has to be a stick.
yeah, yeah.
Because developers have to kind of be forced into this. So,
Bearing in mind, I think it's important to say that just because we're making the developers pay this does not mean that that cost does not get passed down. So basically, we're taxing
The end user.
anybody who
Development.
wants to build whatever kind of development we're talking about. And one of the things that we've talked about is, you know, a lot of places will have like 10 units and above and what. But I think it might make sense to apply it more broadly, actually to all new development. If you want to build a single family house, you gotta pay into the pot too.
because,
It's worth thinking about.
I think that, I think you brought up the Hood River example. So this is, Leavenworth is so small that the number of developments that are more than like 3 units is very, very small. You know, it's infrequent.
Especially after the recent.
Yeah, especially because we just built 2 giant
Right.
apartment complexes. It's like, there's not gonna be a whole lot more of those in the near future, potentially. So this wouldn't apply to a large number of developments, and even if you were like, well, it applies to developments of 4 units and above, and people be like, well, I guess I'm building 3 units, you know,
Right.
on a small lot.
Shows very clearly that developers respond to that. If you charge for 10 units above, they build.
They build 9.
Yeah, right, sure.
So,
Mm.
so in a very small jurisdiction like ours,
Mm.
Hood River has an example where they just say you pay a 1% fee. Like whatever you're doing, any residential development, maybe you can apply it to commercial, I don't know, but like any residential development for sure. You pay a 1% fee, like 1% of your
Yeah.
cost. So say you're like, I'm building a single family home, it's gonna cost me $650,000, I'm paying 1%.
This is their
I'm
excise.
paying a
tax.
1% fee to the city to be allowed to build my house.
Hmm.
And they do the opposite, where you can avoid that fee by having a deed restriction on your house saying that it is affordable, that it will stay in the affordable market. So developers say they're building a triplex. They can just pay a 1% fee of, you know, however many $1 million, so that costs them to build their triplex. They can just pay a 1% fee and that goes into this affordable housing fund. Or they could say, instead of paying the 1% fee, we're actually gonna provide an affordable unit at this development.
Hmm.
But paying the 1% fee will probably be a lot cheaper for them. But if you have to apply it to every single development, and every single
Yeah.
single family home has to pay that 1%, then it actually starts to add up to a meaningful amount because nobody can avoid it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really
It's a
interesting
great idea.
example.
So my question is, did we ever hear from our attorney, Maggie?
He gave me, I'm not sure how it works in Oregon. But this would be something that if we had enough interest, we could look into options. I might be a construction excise tax, but it could be
Fee.
for housing.
Fee.
But then you have to have a program established, somebody runs this program. Because where does the fee go somewhere?
So I know the fee will go up, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
We've got an affordable housing,
So but that's what we needed.
We didn't know
We
that.
didn't know that.
we've got affordable housing set asides that we're doing. And when I get my state taxes passed, it's gonna go into a set aside, which the housing group that we've established and have a housing committee will vet project. So we're not gonna do the projects, we'll be funders of projects that people can bring and get vetted through the housing committee. That will be permanently affordable.
What's in the books right now for construction wise, right? Permit, like, how many millions of dollars are being constructed right now in new constructions in the city of Leavenworth?
I mean, how much does that?
Don't you guys say 1% of that? I mean, is that gonna, we're gonna get $100,000 from this thing if we pass this and do 1% on any new construction? Or is it gonna, are we gonna get almost $1 million?
If you're talking about the building valuation.
Building value.
Yeah. So I'm just
And
curious, what's on the books right now? What's the
they're
point
year?
on planning?
And there's, you know,
I've seen those numbers.
and with the Hood River example, they were all.
They were.
Yeah, what's
It was 1%.
tax at all? Entertain it.
I really don't
Pursuing
know, I really don't know what we are generating in terms of construction value.
I mean, it's fairly highly variable.
It's, yeah, that's.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I get that,
high
I
this
get
year
that.
because of the apartments and the hotel.
Right.
It's gonna be much lower.
Washington.
We can
Washington in
make this in the
general
next
is-
session.
I mean, we're seeing a decrease in overall housing stock built in the state of Washington currently.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it's plummeting, right? Like the rate is dropping rapidly. So if we tax new housing construction, it does us very little good in the long run. If we care about truly removing exclusionary zoning or zoning practices from keeping people from affording a house in our community. So one of the big problems is we don't have any facts about how this affects semi-rural and tourist economies. So there's kind of this gap out there, like in understanding of how an inclusionary zoning policy would even influence the market in our town. So I think that there are two things, like it's removing exclusionary zoning should maybe be the focus before we get to focusing on a financially based inclusionary zoning practice. So it's like multifamily everywhere, pushing much further than we have kind of our zoning laws that we have in place today.
Because I just want to add to what it said, exclusionary zoning, like single family zoning is exclusionary zoning.
And we
Like-
need inclusionary zoning
Yeah.
because we exist under.
And it's horrible that inclusionary zoning has been turned into a financial concept when it is actually more of a more meta concept that sits over this financial process. So driving inclusionary zoning, and I know we've struggled with condos, we've struggled with ADUs, we've struggled with all the different ways to add more density to town. But these are the questions we have to answer, I think, first before we necessarily get to it. So that's part of this. Do we pull inclusionary zoning? Do we push it forward? Because this is the financial side of inclusionary zoning. And I don't think we're prepared to deliver on the back end of it, no matter what we do. Right?
Mm.
That's my opinion. So that I'd like to share with everyone. So just thinking through the kind of full flow.
Process.
Yeah.
Of the inclusionary zoning examples that you guys have reviewed, I mean, there were a lot in your packets from varying different states. And then the RC3 or something, they also talked about some inclusionary zoning here in Washington State. In your reviews as planning commissioners, have any of those risen to the top as really viable options that we could potentially, use as
The
a
unit,
foundation to start from? And
the
not
unit
reinvent
counts are
the
too
wheel?
high. The unit counts are in the
Yeah.
40+ units.
I
Like,
mean, like
model-
the Boulder one, I don't think it has.
doesn't
Well,
it?
no,
No, no,
single unit.
no,
It
no,
goes,
40 in Boulder.
It's 40 units, it's 100,000 people who live there.
No, no,
It's only,
Yeah, in the town, it's 100,000.
it's hidden in one of the statements in there, which is it's
But
a
it-
proviso at the
it's
bottom.
only-
it's only been in
only
place
applies
for
to 40 units or
a
more.
year, and they don't really have any.
Yeah. So part of the
Yeah, like
thing we're
everything is
facing.
just bigger. All the examples are essentially larger jurisdictions that have more multifamily development. And so it doesn't,
Elastic,
we
more
said, we
elastic
say
markets.
10 units, people are like, I mean, how many developments of more than 10 units are even proposed in the next 4 years? Maybe one, maybe, And you say 4 units and people might just build a triplex instead, like you say 3, I don't know. And it just, it's really hard to do a percentage when you're getting down to the really small size of development that we have here.
But
And
that's,
that is almost all the examples.
that's the discouraging thing is that website or the software, right, is you plug in the numbers and I mean, we've all played with them and it's like 40 or 60 is the sweet spot. We just can't
Yeah.
fit that. So that's what I'm trying to, that's where we're all here. Like, I don't know where to start. Where do you?
Well, that's where the Hood River model for me.
That is
Yeah.
the option,
It
yeah.
feels like the most.
Right.
It covers everybody.
It is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so,
And their middle housing
And
plan
there's
is
no way
pretty good.
back. But there's a lot of really great exemptions too, that I think are really important exemptions.
100%.
So I think the question for the council is where, if we do focus on inclusionary zoning as a more of the excise tax model, where it's coming into a city account, like how do we define the use case? Like, what do we use it for? How do you use it after
well,
the fact?
that's
And they do
already
that.
defined.
Terry's got that.
We've got,
It's already done.
we're waiting for projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the house, we've got a community and we've got a resident here sits on that committee.
Give
And
us a quick
it's-
rundown on.
Yeah, well. Maybe before I do that, I heard a question from Travis earlier that I might be able to provide data on. Peter's council committee. You asked what the developers think. So one of the things that housing committee did is we met with several developers, to kind of get their perspective. And while a developer will never say they want to stay, I think the good news is that what the city has done with passing some of the ordinances around cottage housing and condominiumization and a couple other things, that now if you added the stick, as it was described earlier, it would kind of push them all the way to starting to use those other ordinances. So they were interested and excited about those ordinances, but you could tell that they weren't quite ready to go there. And they needed a little shove, to be honest.
Mm.
And I don't think they would, you know, if you'd started with a stick first, they would have reacted much worse, right? But I do think now with those other options on the table, they wouldn't see it as combative as it could have been. So that's just the perception that we got after interviewing several, like Jordan, McDermott, McDevitt, sorry, and then Matt Malin. No, that's good. Sorry.
First name.
Matt. And there was one other. But as far as projects, yeah, so there's been a lot of conversation around that as well. With the hope that we could go, that there is one that we talked with Matt about, where it would be a cottage housing type of project. And they have a lot of, interesting things happening there with, including and I'm probably using the wrong term, but a pre-designed or pre-manufactured home concept to bring the cost way down on building the homes.
Prefab from Ben.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that I'm using the right term because these are solid, they're built on a concrete foundation.
But they're factory built.
Yeah,
It seems like a dirty word, it's a dirty word in the past.
that's right. that's
Yeah,
right. I don't
we get
want
what you're
to
saying.
imply that they're not
No.
cheap or anything like that. These
Cheap
are
balls.
solid homes, but you can get the cost way down by using this approach and other things. And so, you know, I think there are definite sparks starting to happen. And interest starting to rise, and that maybe if a stick could come in, that would be just enough incentive to put an equation together.
Well, I think the question for us though is like, what stick do we use? Like the 1% isn't a stick that will drive much change. But if we, then percentage-based allocation of housing is. You have to include 1 out of X units, or then we get into the numbers game where they'll build to the minimum. Or build to the max before they hit the.
Yeah,
distance.
those thresholds.
I reached out, sorry. People older and they're. Housing, 15. But they said, like, the first step is doing.
Could you say that again, Megan?
Doing a feasibility analysis.
Oh,
See what would work, what may or may not work. They sent me this, best practices for feasibility studies that I'll send them electronically. I just got them, so. Here, I'm gonna just talk about, feasibility, or you just adopt. Talk about nexus studies, it talks about what would be included in that study. It was kind of interesting. I haven't got to do a deep dive, so I just got it. But I have that for you. They also talked about, if you're looking at a program, looking at the percentage requirements. So how, is it 10%, is it 5% of the units are needing to be affordable? And that number after, you know, is it, if you have a 40-unit development, 10% have to be. So looking at those numbers, so your feasibility analysis has to come into play. And then setting that rate for the cash and loop.
Do you have any follow-up take homes that they have from those programs?
They, I mean, they've been doing it since 2000.
Yeah.
They've been, and again, it's a big community and a big, program. I did get a contact though, so I thought like, if I can get some questions from you guys, like I have a good contact. I did ask them. But, like asking about what their biggest challenges were, what the greatest benefits were, how they address it, subdivision or land use. Any reductions in development in place, and do they offer incentives? They don't offer. Anyway, I'd be happy to forward you on.
Maggie, they're building their smallest building is more like 40 units, right? 40 and up.
Is what the.
Because it's 100,000
Again, I mean, I appreciate that they've done all of that, but again, it's such a much bigger city to
Yeah.
do all of that. You know, I mean, I don't know, I guess I think there's gotta be a way we this work for the community of 2,500. That has all the pressures that we have on housing, and that's not older.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, again, I think it is critical that we come up with, whether that's 10% and just. So, looking at this cottage housing, they're looking at, I think, 28 units or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 28 or 30.
Yeah, so I mean, you get 10%, you get 3 of those. You know, which again. It's better than nothing.
Yep.
You know, if you can get 3 units. Of a fairly affordable project to begin with, and you get 3 that would even, quote, be more. Again, but how many of those are we gonna see? That one is looking at probably, you know, again, ownership. How many developments of size? McDevitt, for instance, I mean, he's a land developer, he's not a housing developer, so each of those lots gets sold off to somebody else. You don't have 10 homes, you don't have 4. In most of those, that say one of them's gotta be affordable or whatever. So, again, and I see our biggest drive in need is not in the rental side, it's in the ownership side. Is opportunities for the. Because, well, if you're looking at 80%, 100%. Leavenworth House. I mean, they fit that. They're high. I mean, it doesn't fit for a lot of our work. They're at that upper, but if you pencil out what their costs are. It's in that 100%. Now, what we don't have any of is ownership for.
Other than.
Other than the few, again, that have been. And are, and hopefully will be, but they're gonna, again, they require, and I've said this many times. They're gonna require subsidies to bring down, to make it affordable, or again, demanding. A certain number of those units, which again, won't get you very many because ownership tends to be. 1 or 2, whatever. It's not gonna be. Big projects like this cottage one.
There was a bigger fund, I mean, that could also be bigger because the city could come,
Well,
and then, you know, you start to get a multiple.
that's where if you have your 1% excise tax, that's where it could go, is into projects that could buy them down and make them. Anything the city puts money into will be permanent. I guarantee you that. We're not gonna say, yeah, for this homeowner, and then it's gonna go to the market. We need to create permanent, like managed, permanently affordable with the money that we get. Whether it's from a 1% fee or whether it's from a different tax that we can get from the state. But whatever we get, I'll guarantee you, we'll look at putting it into permanent affordability, workforce, housing. It's a community.
So I have some thoughts. Because I know that the planning commission is looking for some direction. We don't want to just walk away from this because it's so overly complicated, because we really need it in our community, right? So. Looking at a lot of the examples that you guys have had in your packet, Boulder, Telluride, Aspen, Jackson. None of those are equitable in comparison to the city of Leavenworth. They have way more, square miles associated with their city limits and population, so it's really, really tough. Hood River, not a bad place to start, honestly, and reading through this again, I mean, they only have a little over 8,000 people that live in Hood River, so it's not a terrible comparable. And I really love the simplicity of what they have going on here as a starting point that we can then fine tune to fit our city, and I think that would be a really good place for the planning commission to start. And we can fine tune things like I mean, really, the simplicity is in the fact that, hey, we're gonna charge this 1% fee in lieu for absolutely every type of construction. And that is gonna be how we're gonna generate funds for affordable housing. And they keep it really simple. And then they have this nice list of exemptions. And I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I think they're tracking really well. I don't necessarily agree with exempting ADUs. But maybe as a way to encourage ADUs, they get a partial exemption if you're building an ADU versus a single family residence. And then I think one of the things that's missing in here is how they apply it to various sizes of developments. And I think that we could add some information there, like this applies to, you know, if I'm replacing a residential structure that isn't increasing living space. I think that's fair. If someone's house burns down and they're rebuilding it, I don't want to see
Right.
this tax apply, right? But if you're scraping a really old, small home that's 100 years old and you're building a really large home, I think this applies. You know, things that are exempt are like private and public schools and long-term care facilities and those things. I think that that's really smart. But what's not captured in here, is developments specifically, and we could write in here language that provides either a full exemption or a partial exemption, depending upon how much affordable housing they're building into their development. Right? And you can fine tune it with the size of the development and a percentage. And if it's like, hey, if we're gonna only build a duplex and our threshold is if you build 10% affordable, then you get an exemption and they can't meet that, then they just pay the tax. Right? You know, if you're building one residential unit and it meets our AMI requirement, you're exempt. Great, but if you're not, you pay the tax. You know, those sorts of things. So we can fine tune it, but also keep it really easy for our staff to administer, really easy for community to understand, and not create pages and pages and pages of code that people don't know how to follow. And I think it's important to bring everybody along on something like this because it has the potential of applying to everyone in one way or another.
I think we all agree with you 100% on that.
It also seems really fair and equitable in a lot of different ways versus saying, you know, only if you're developing four units or something like that.
But it
Because-
also, if you say it applies to the, it's also, again, the commercial is driving the need for the house. And so to ask
Yeah.
a hotel going in to pay a 1% fee, that's in lieu of them supplying workforce housing, which again, other communities
They're
have
benefiting.
required them to, provide, so.
So going forward with this, the question, James, chicken before the egg, inclusionary zoning. So did we do that piece first? I think we all agree with
Are you
it.
talking about eliminating exclusionary zoning?
Yes,
I mean, we've been trending in that direction, right, with the way that we've
Yeah.
been rezoning.
Very slow.
I know.
It-
I live in a multifamily zone. I forget I live in a multifamily zone. I don't know what that means. Again,
So,
doesn't bother me. I guess I know it bothers some people.
right, but also
That's
we've
the
got a
key
lot of
point.
state mandates that are gonna come into play really soon.
Right.
That are gonna
2026.
require a lot more development on lots or allow a lot more development, so we're really trending away from single family zoning anyways, because the state's forcing us in that direction.
Yeah.
So rather than, I think, opening that Pandora's box in the community, which the state is already going to require us to do, we just really focus on the things that we
Yeah.
really need, because we're already gonna be going in that direction.
I tend to agree with that.
Okay. Follow me? I brought it because James brought it up. He's like super smart. You're
No,
smart.
I don't
You're smart
disagree
too.
with, I don't
You're smart.
disagree with James,
But
but the
James
way
is-
that the state legislature is making decisions, we're already heading in that
Is that
direction.
it? Is that it?
It
Does it look like
already has.
Lex Luthor?
House Bill 1110 has already stated that middle housing is middle housing, and what did they legislate that for anybody over 75,000? And then if you're in the contiguous growth boundary area, 25 to 75, also legislated. So they got it down to 25,000, which is about as low as the state could legislate. But all of these, every move made by us and by the state is pushing everything towards no such thing as single family residential.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, and
Yeah.
so for us to, look ahead and, get ahead of that where other people are being forced into it earlier seems extremely prudent and also very worthwhile because, the faster we can do this, the better we can be with it.
Right. I agree. Yeah. Are we on track with that? With getting ahead of it? This is 2026, right? We've got a year, but like, I know we're moving that, we're making moves. I understand we're doing
But
that.
again, I just want to say, I mean, I like just like what you're saying is the Hood River and the thing that we need to push forward on is just to get our, yeah, get our attorney on board with how to make this fit with what we can legally do.
Well, it sounds like a language conversation with our attorney, because in the fees are already allowed in Washington state. I don't know if we can call it an excise tax. That's gonna be a question for Tom. But there's a lot of other fees. There's a lot of different
Other way,
ways that
that's
they-
what I'm
we
saying,
can
is
reach
to
the
get
same
them
end.
involved in the language.
There's also, I would talk to our lawyer about some additional things too, which is, how the lien. If we do go down a property path where it's like percentage of property, when the lien expires, the repurchase right is given first to the city. Which is an interesting proviso in some, not in Hood Rivers, but in others. that
Oh,
I've
for the
seen.
notice to title, like if we do, like, it has to be affordable for 50 years or something. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what Hood River did, is it had to be affordable.
But they
for
didn't
50
include
years.
the after the fact point, so at 50 years, it's the
Right,
market is like up $2 million in Hood River, which is probably not unreasonable for that
Yeah.
community, the way it's going, then it would be sold at $2 million to the market.
Mhm.
So like including this loop of affordability in a way where
Yeah.
that's an interesting way to do it, but there's some potential there.
So you're saying like after 50 years, the city would have the right of first refusal?
Correct.
If they were gonna sell it.
If they were going
If
to
it
sell
was-
it.
I have a question, so. The idea, what we're leaning towards here is that. We are not actually mandating. That affordable units are included. We are adding an incentive, because we'll say you have to pay this fee. You can get out of the fee if you do include affordable units. And we already have these incentives in the code for including affordable units. But really, it's just, we're going to grow the city's fund for subsidizing housing via this code change. So how do we ensure that if the city is not responsible for the development, how do we ensure that that fund is getting used to actually create more affordable housing? Because if we just like wait for developers to come to us and we haven't changed the incentives, it's like, okay, we do have more funding, but like, do we need more in place?
We will use third parties to do, I mean, Mend, for instance, in an ownership model would probably be the most likely source, because they're local and because they're doing it and they've got, they would be the ones that we would look to say, okay, this is gonna go in your portfolio because we're bringing money into this.
So the way this would work is like, if right now you don't have enough in the housing fund.
Right.
To make a big dent, but if we did have a big chunk of money, the city would actively
yeah.
seek. Like,
Yes,
okay,
it's-
Mend, we're gonna do this,
Yep.
we're gonna give you this money and you're gonna do the project,
We would
and
actively
you get all the
ask for
incentives in the code.
projects and how they're gonna keep them affordable, and again, they're gonna lean on. I'll guarantee they'll find those that know how to do it.
Well, and the money goes a lot further if the city's not developing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't want to be the developer,
But, like,
with this
Yeah.
essential enterprise fund. We want to have a partner that can do it affordably.
Yep.
The city can't be
Yeah.
that partner. It
But I
just,
mean, as long as the
state law doesn't
city,
allow.
as long as the city is pursuing,
Yeah.
as long as it's not just the city waiting for somebody to.
we got money, we're gonna put it into house, we've been,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, I mean, since I've been there, we've been setting aside 200,000 a year, that's just out of our general fund.
Mhm.
Because we gotta do something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's gone to help the men, it's gone to, so. No, if we've got dollars, we'll put it into house.
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, we've actually had some significant conversations also with men about exactly what Mayor's describing. And very often it's a situation with men that if the city were able to come in and buy the dirt, that just drives the cost of the house down automatically, right? So it's not like the city would have to have large sums of funds to buy whole homes, right? If you could just do the dirt piece, sometimes sometimes that takes 30% right off the top of the cost of the home, things like that. But I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware, and I'm sitting here thinking, we need to probably get the planning committee and the housing committee together to do for a joint session like this. Because we've had these conversations to talk about how to use the funds if they were there and what kind of projects we're targeting, and we could run you guys through those projects. But there's been a lot of, I guess my point is, there's been a lot of conversations already headed down.
Allison, were you looking for a mechanism to ensure that whatever money city was gained from this fee or whatever, that was a way to track it to what's going where it's supposed to? Is that what you?
No, I'm not concerned that it will be used for housing, but that it will be used immediately
Mhm.
for, you know, that like,
The needs
this,
there.
this is an
money's there.
imminent problem. Like,
Right.
we are currently in a housing crisis. So, you know, instead of kind of like, well, you know, in a few years, maybe we'll get it together. It's like, no, this-
Yeah.
like,
No,
we need to do this as, like, as soon as funds are available, they should be getting spent,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So, which, again, is a matter of like, what other incentives might be helpful to support the construction of more housing. You know, if there is funding to subsidize it, that's like a huge step.
right.
That we've all kind of been complaining about, like, well, we can offer you all these options to build affordable housing, but like, it has to be subsidized.
But to Kurt's point, it would be nice to actually sit down
Yeah.
with that committee and maybe even amend or others and say, what are your hurdles for development? And then those can really guide us when it comes to the exceptions included.
And one of the things that you guys could talk about as a planning commission, and maybe even build this into the regulations, is some guidance for the city and how the money gets spent. Like, you have, maybe there has to be a capital project list that you expend the funds on. And so that requires the city to coordinate with partner organizations within the city, or, you know, a housing authority or something like that, come up with a capital project list so that you know where the money's going. And there's some transparency in that too, with the community,
Would you propose a timer on that as well? So.
as
when the
far as when you're going to execute those types of
Yeah,
projects.
money enters, money leaves on a scheduled release, or are you thinking?
I don't know, because
generic
it's hard.
project by
If some of the capital projects are larger, you're gonna wanna save the money for a little bit so
Sure.
that you can actually.
Just
afford
wondering
it. Yeah.
how good that, because that will come up at some point in time.
And
Like if we're
Right.
sitting on money that will be perceived.
But I also think that
Yeah.
needs to be revisited on a regular
Yeah,
basis
okay.
too, like every 3 to 5 years, you
Yeah.
reevaluate your capital projects for housing.
Yeah.
So as I hit my 2 million a year.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, are we not able, we thinking it's just too untenable to go on the other side of that coin and say 8%, 5% has to be, you have to build 5% of your product, 5% of your, whatever you build has to be affordable. No fees, just here's, if you're gonna build in this town, 5%, 8% has to be affordable.
Well,
How do you do that on two
5%
buses?
organic developments are we gonna have in the next 10 years?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm asking the question, is it just doesn't look like, because of this,
We just,
there's no space there anymore? I mean, it's
Because
not
the
big enough.
projects aren't big enough for the
Yeah.
most part, because our community's not big enough, our city
The-
limits isn't big enough.
the scale.
In order to hit a 10% qualification, you have to build 10 units or more.
And
And
the
that-
market, oh, sorry, I was gonna say, the market shows that the developers will build 9 units if that's the thing, or you set the number and they will build right below that, or they won't build at all. I'm not saying they won't build at all, but the forcing them to do something really seems to put a bad taste in them.
Well, even some encouragements aren't enough, because we thought, we were given indication that when they built Wagner, when they built the new one, would consider the long-term housing tax credits. But when we passed that, oh, that doesn't pencil out.
The multifamily
Yeah,
tax
the
exemption.
multifamily exemption.
That's because they wanted the same deal they got down in Wenatchee, where they didn't have to build. affordable.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, that didn't do it, but the same group, same outfit, is doing 5% affordable in Chelan because they were required.
It's the Wagner.
Widener, and it's because they had to go through the conditional use permit to get, because they had to do, rezone it and get a conditional use on the property. They had a large project. And that was put in as a condition, and they're doing it.
And we could have different rates, right? If it's single family, it's this rate. If it's more, it can be a different rate. Commercial can be a different rate.
And yeah,
One real quick, feasibility study, or what did Boulder recommend?
What, like, city would have recommended.
I mean, it seems like a good idea. Is it something that the city can pursue? And if so, how long would we have to wait for it? I don't,
We hired consultants to.
no, I understand that, but is that something that people feel like is worthwhile? And if so, how long would it take? I'm not familiar with that process at all.
Feasibility for what though? We already know that we need this, right?
Well, not,
I guess,
market-
what are we doing the feasibility for?
well,
because I've,
can you say basically it's,
Find the nexus for where that sweet spot is.
Yeah.
What you could do, and I'm saying it's such a different apples and oranges to me that I don't. know.
There's also not much, there's
I'm
not
just
proof
wondering
that there
what
is
the
a nexus
comparables
point.
would be.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
what
actually
kind
very little proof
Yeah.
that there is a nexus in any of this.
And
so
also
that's part of the problem.
what comparables are gonna be used to provide us data? We're a very
Yeah.
unique community.
Yeah.
2,500 people.
Yeah.
That has almost 3 million visitors a year. I mean, what are the other comparables gonna be specific to Washington State? Because it's easier that way
The
to be
literature,
all under the state.
the
same laws,
literature just
but-
doesn't support any like
No.
comparative studies unless you get to a certain scale. Like
Yeah.
there's and even in those studies, everything is literally all over the place.
I mean,
I've
one
had a hard
thing,
time figuring that out.
one thing we could
Yeah.
do is say for development up to 10 units, whatever. You know, it's 1%. And then if you're building
Large,
over,
yeah.
you know, if you're building a larger scale development, maybe that percentage increases. Because there's still the option of saying, well, instead of paying a fee, you can provide affordable housing. So there'd be a greater incentive for
To build the housing instead of paying fees.
to build the affordable housing.
which would
If it
probably
be
be
higher.
preferable from a community standpoint, right?
Yeah.
It takes out the middleman, it's probably faster. So we'd probably rather have,
Yeah, but it's like, we don't wanna base our whole code on that because it's only gonna apply to like one development per 4 years, you know?
Right.
But that way, you know, if we did say, oh, well, you know, if you are going to build one of our rare, large scale developments, there's, you know, the fee is higher, the incentive is greater to build affordable units instead. But if it was the same structure of fee and et cetera, then it could easily be included in the same code, I would think. Just a different rate.
Well, living with sought after by Chelan is, and if the incentive to the developer is there, could we keep this a similar idea of the Hood River with the 1% to everybody, but if you're going to build a development, you just must do it with no fee in lieu? Is that a possibility? Where we
Starting at
make
a
it ours,
certain
we
size?
make it ours where, okay, fine, single family residential, construction, some amount of percentage or whatever we base it on, great. But if you're going to do anything over whatever we deem the number is that pencils, to just force them to do it? Would that
Yeah, well, I mean,
disincentivize them at that
It,
scale?
We're in debate.
it might
I think people
disincentivize
like
development.
options.
Well, what it sounds to me
Yeah, I
like
feel like they-
is that if, let's say you set the threshold at 10, the 10 units that you're throwing around, you pay a percentage up to 10. So if people are building 9 to get out from having to build
It's a
affordable
much
housing,
larger
you're still getting money. And then if you
Yeah.
build the 10, then you're forcing them to build
So-
units.
A
have
data
one.
point, a data point is that the state of California has no laws for inclusionary housing below 10 units in 151 jurisdictions. Like 10 is, that number is too low, it's artificial in a way, so I think we have to choose the monetary path if we're doing anything.
And we're thinking middle term too, right? We talk about either out the icicle, there's a lot of places to build multifamily housing up there, maybe see, like, there's that's why I said middle term, long term, like 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 20 years,
For what?
incorporating them.
Oh,
Where there are property, expanding city limits, yeah. Right, I mean, this is something.
I mean, a lot of the stuff out the ice field isn't even in the UGA yet.
No, we'd have to be in the area first, which is mostly north of us.
I'm just trying to give myself hope that there's some, we're meeting our, like, we're creating these, we're spending so much time on this, and there's like 2 plots of property in a city.
Well,
that
that's,
we're, like,
yeah,
It
I
just,
guess,
I'm just trying to make myself,
Our city
City
limits
limits.
has been growing. We have expanded.
And we are gonna
base.
work at getting exchanging some UGA
Yeah.
or more buildable UGA. That's,
And we have some infill opportunities.
Yeah.
But the opportunities are small for large developments now,
and,
so
yeah,
that's why I'm drawn to this Hood River example of capturing
right.
pretty much
Capturing
everything.
Everything. Yep.
putting a lot of effort into something that only applies to large developments is like, it's just not really gonna.
The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
But I like the idea of graduating.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a bigger impact on our need for affordable housing if you decide to do a big project but aren't willing to consider. So therefore, the percentage, I don't know what that would be, but again, I mean, if you think that Widener was able to do 5% Chelan,
Do we know how many units the total that is?
there's
368.
almost
368.
368 total units.
It's not houses, apartments, right?
apartments.
The second Widener.
So that's 17 and a half, if that round down, round up, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with that, yeah. 17, so that's 17 affordable units.
That's great.
Okay, that's fantastic.
So then, so what I'm trying to get at is, so what would it take to incentivize them to say, oh, it'd be better for us to do that 5% than to pay that fee that's gonna be, so somewhere you escalate that fee up to try to get those affordable units built into those bigger.
Essentially a balloon.
Yeah, that you graduate up to say, it's gonna be, I don't know what that percentage would be that would incentivize them to say, oh, we'd be better off doing.
Right.
Affordable units.
So there's, I mean, the incentive list that I've seen, I'm looking at one right now, density bonuses, zoning variance, expedited permitting, fee reduction, tax relief, public subsidy, or design concessions. That's a common list. Which Hood River has to some degree, I think, in theirs.
Well.
I think this is different though, like if we're doing inclusionary zoning, we're just outright requiring it, right? It's essentially outright requiring. It's not trying to incentivizing it. We're saying, well, we have incentives and they're not working. So now we're just gonna require it, right?
Yeah.
And so we have some incentives built into our code already that Allison was already talking about. And this is more of a, now we're just requiring it, but here's a list of our exemptions where it won't apply.
And
Right?
here's
Yeah,
where
but
it will apply double.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and if, you know, in this, it's like exemptions, if the housing that is subject to a deed restriction requiring the property to remain affordable, this says you only get a 50% exemption, and I would think you'd get like a full exemption if you have a deed restriction, especially for single family home. Well, that's because they have a 81 to 120 AMI because they're requiring everything to be below 80 AMI. So you get 50% if you're between 81 and 120. Oh,
And
I
then you
see.
get
So
full
that
100% exemption if you're below.
residential, okay, I see. So you get the full exemption if you're below 80. So anyway, if you use the exemption, I would assume you also get to use the incentive code, like. If it's affordable housing, then you get to use
It's already there.
the incentives for affordable housing, so. So there is some benefit, you know, that it's like. You don't have to pay the fee plus. You get to take advantage of the density bonuses that we have in here. And I mean, if you want us to look at like additional incentives that people could take advantage of, if they choose to not pay the fee. We could revisit that code. You guys can also decide if you want to increase the thresholds for those incentives.
But I still think when you come to ownership and they're gonna sell it for an affordable or whatever, so they're not gonna get exempt, again, I think James said, I like, is somehow making sure that stays. And if it doesn't stay, that the city can buy that or.
Well, I mean, that's
keep it
in
so
here.
that we can keep it
Yeah, it's-
affordable versus it going away after.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the code and the exemption. It says if you have a deed restriction for affordability, it has to be for at least 50 years. And we can talk about if we want it 50 years or all eternity or whatever. And then.
Well, what, I know they go 99 years renewable.
Yeah, we could do that.
Or certain
There you
rules,
go.
yeah.
And then it has the Hood River Code, in the event that a property receiving an exemption for affordable housing is subsequently sold for an amount that no longer qualifies as affordable housing, the seller shall be liable for the following: an amount equal to the excise tax at the time of construction, also interest on the tax at an annual rate of 12%, and a late fee of 5% of all the tax.
Oh, they're good.
They're like,
The sales price.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they mean business, you know, they're like, you gotta stick
Try
with.
it.
That's one way. to
Which
keep
is,
it.
Have you
Yeah,
reached out
you
to
gotta-
the river at all about this?
Waiting until we have.
Okay, great.
yeah.
I like the Hood River idea, and I just echo what Al said earlier, that the utilization of funds seems to be paramount here as well. Because we can sit here and we can come up with all these great ways to figure out, a way to fill the coffers with some money, but what are we gonna do? And do we have goals that we're working towards that, that we can, say, hey, doing this is probably gonna net us this amount of money, and this is what we're gonna do with that money, and we can actually see that happen. I am, with Allison, I'm slightly concerned, or I won't say that I'm concerned, but that would be my number one.
Carl's been sitting here with a coffin for 2 years. And all I would say, oh, yeah, reelect me. No,
What?
all I would say, I'm not, I don't. All I would say is, that's great, but that's not the planning commission's concern. I mean, I get that it's a concern of you as an individual on the planning
Well-
commission, but the planning commission isn't spending money or planning projects. You're the policy folks and the
Which is
land.
why I was like talking about maybe having a requirement that there's a capital project process associated with all of this. Because Carl's right, you guys don't spend money, you don't create projects or anything like that. But driving the code in the direction that really incentivizes
Okay,
and
yeah.
requires, right,
Yeah.
creating a hook that says,
Yeah.
you have to be very intentional about where this money goes. All this money is obviously going into seemingly sort of an enterprise fund in a different way that we're gonna be manifesting it with this in lieu fee. And the council needs to be very, very focused on where the money is gonna be spent. You have to have capital projects, you have to be coordinating with local partners, however you guys wanna tailor it, would be very direct about how that all plays out.
And that's why I keep circling back to the incentive, the affordable housing incentive chapter that we already have in the code. Is because it's like, well, if we now have more funding to pursue affordable housing, we want to make sure that we have provided for incentives
Right.
and made sure that that's going to be feasible and that that money can be used, essentially, that it will happen. So if we need to edit that incentive code in any way, as part of this, it could make sense.
Yeah, and again, I think that I would like to hear more from men, the housing authorities and others, what their hurdles are and what the opportunities are, because then we can really tailor those adjustments to real life examples.
I could also see some tweaking of the numbers. So having some feedback from the city about, you know, are the numbers too low? Are we not getting enough money or are they too high and we're seeing tax
Decrease in development.
that we don't like? Or no matter how much homework we do, these numbers are gonna be shots in the dark. So I could see some tweaking in future years.
It's like overtime effort.
Yeah, you know, it's been 5 years. Nobody's built a new house. We got the number.
I'm very, yeah.
It'd be a lawsuit first.
Nevertheless, you know, it'd be nice to have some feedback from the city as to whether we think this is working, because
Well, it'd be
We don't
interesting
get
just to
those
find out how
numbers.
much development, for instance, in the last 5 years, what the value
Yeah.
of that was,
a
just
lot,
to give us
yeah.
an idea.
I can remember, when we didn't have our permit software until 2020. I know our data is pretty good the last 2 years. So I could probably run a report on all new construction, single family, or whatever is not exempt.
I'd like to see that.
But this is the total valuation, and if it is 1% across the board, it's well,
Hey, why don't you run 2% while you're at it?
Trend would be good.
We have the means.
The directional trend on the.
But really, the very first thing we need to do is have Maggie get back in touch with Tom Grastrop to determine whether or not this idea that is in Oregon is legal for us to do here in Washington.
Right.
Because he didn't
Yeah.
answer that question. What he said was, I don't know Oregon law.
If you read this too, he could have read federal law, which states several different things about how you have to, feasibility is part of defending any of these. So if we were sued, the National
Yeah.
Association of Home Builders proposes to developers that they sue cities if the code is not well done. So,
And Thomas brought that up to us before when we did the white salmon thing. It was what defending it, and that's, defending it is always the big thing.
Right.
With the city attorneys.
Right.
Can we defend it? Is it defendable?
Right.
Is it worth defending?
That's,
Yeah.
that's where.
That's the first thing he's gonna do.
That's the same thing that we hear when I want to put a fee on empty homes.
Which could be
Yeah.
another funding source
Which is
for
another
affordable housing.
Stream.
But I wouldn't
But-
mix that with this. 'Cause
No,
you're-
no, I'm just saying, both of those are potential legal challenges
Yeah.
that you need to be willing and able to defend.
So that's what I passed out here.
Yeah, that's-
Talk about the feasibility study.
What would it require for us to do a feasibility study?
Hire a consultant.
$60,000
That's
$60,000.
what that's my concern.
That's money, it all comes down.
Let's start with Tom.
Maggie, but we've also got the $200,000 in affordable housing money from this year that we could use on feasibility for affordable housing tools.
Maybe the feasibility would justify higher fee and then we'll make the money.
Yeah.
It didn't, then it would be.
I think it's worth looking into, and I think it's, talk to Tom, feasibility study.
Yeah.
I'm-
Well,
I'm for-
legalities first and then feasibility
Yeah.
study.
Yeah.
If deemed necessary.
Yeah.
Made progress.
Kurt, I was gonna ask you, there is a possible development, it's one, cause I missed that last one.
Yeah, so there's an actual one that, and I'm gonna throw that out, it's located somewhere on the far side of. Safeway.
It's River Bend between the KOA and River Bend Drive.
Finally,
It's like the corner of.
Yeah,
the wasteland there.
It's 2 acres.
Yeah.
And this guy, he's
It's
been,
an oil station.
And the exciting thing was is that it's the kind of thing that they can do very fast, again, because of these pre-manufactured homes.
Right.
It's a potentially a 6-month turnaround when the funding's available. And so, and this is, just, I want to plant the seed possibly. This highlights for me the need for maybe a good coordination meeting between planning and housing advisory, because it is those two sides of the equation, right? We're off and we're a new committee, we're just getting our legs, I would say, but we're trying to figure out what kind of projects could we spend if we had money. What would we spend them on? And so something like this is a fairly fast moving, easy kind of turnkey type of project that seems to check a lot of boxes.
okay,
So we're gonna go a little bit deeper into it, understand it more fully. And maybe there's a point where we present some projects either to this joint group or some other way.
How many units, these are residences, right?
Yeah, so that's where the cottage housing was very attractive.
Okay.
Yeah,
And that unit, subdivision, that small lot.
You know, or the condominium, I think right now.
Well, the condominiums, but they'd rather have the other.
And how many units, what are we talking?
I think total it was about,
We're just waiting for you guys to pass it.
I know, it's on, it's coming up, folks, council.
which one?
Unit lots.
Unit lots.
November 12th, City council
Small
meeting that
lots.
will never end.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a
I'm not gonna
long
be
one.
here.
Well, be a very long meeting.
What's that?
Oh, yeah.
We
We've got
did,
executive sessions as well.
Yeah, we didn't have a.
That's right,
quorum.
we didn't have a quorum.
Everything was on-
Everything, last meeting.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, get the Red Bull. So not to prolong this, but I'm just thinking,
Well,
Is
we
it-
have to show that we actually.
is this unit thing active with 30? Is that a possible place we could use inclusionary zoning? I mean, like percentage wise, there's,
No, he wants to do actual real life affordability. He wants to keep the purchase price under 4.
that's where he's starting at.
He's very motivated.
Oh, okay.
That's awesome.
And our median listing price on 986,
867.
right?
What's going up?
900.
I said 986.
Median?
Median listing price
Listed
In our entire.
in our entire,
It's
in town, it's like in the high sevens now.
In town it's like 7, right?
Yeah.
Is he planning to take advantage of any of the like affordable housing incentives?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's,
Because cottage housing already is kind of a density bonus in a way.
yeah, that's, I mean, that's.
There's other items that he-
Yeah, and that's what changed was.
Unit would be transformational.
The new conversation started with I think it was cottage that started the
Mhm.
whole.
Yeah.
Thought, you thought.
Yes.
Because we did get preliminary approval for it, just the 6 lots.
That's the one I would propose.
And then, you know,
Oh, he could be-
He doesn't want to. He doesn't.
the way our student lots.
You're 3
fingers
He just wants to sell
He just wants to make money. He wants to provide affordable housing. Affordable. Let's use the
He
different
just wants
word.
low cost.
He wants to provide.
Okay, guys.
Housing.
You
Sorry,
hear that?
sorry.
No,
At the hearing, we need to change that unit lot subdivision, because it only applies now to under 1 acre sized plots. This is a 2 acre. So
Why
if
did
we
we
wanna
even put
use
Why
it,
did we put that?
came from the state.
that's what,
It also doesn't apply to anything that's a non, like, under.
Huh.
Why, not formally with you.
Hmm.
I think it's the we got another.
Yeah, I think that we tried to get rid of the non-conforming thing and you said the state, it was like very specific.
Hmm.
We'll fix it.
Well, he could make,
You have to do that, right?
he could do 2.
Right. 1 acre project.
2 1 acre projects.
Do you,
We
do you
have-
want us,
Oh, you're.
do you want us to clean that up? And
you have to spend the money to do.
do another hearing on Tuesday, or I guess July 10th?
Do we need to schedule another hearing or we can add it?
Maggie, I think we're asking for a record. Could we make that change in next Tuesday's planning commission meeting, or would we have to?
It's already going to be in the packet for
Okay.
the.
Or
So
the-
you guys
well,
have to
like,
make.
you
You
guys-
have to amend it after, you can
You
amend
guys
it, yeah.
can-
We can change
Okay,
it.
good.
Can we have
Yeah, don't amend it.
Drew come and suggest some additional amendments coming from the planning commission so that we
Get it
get
right.
it right?
It's next Tuesday.
Or even.
No.
No,
No,
On the 12th.
Well,
After yours.
I'm out of town. I don't know.
it's after your meeting, so you could come, you guys could discuss it, say we'd like these changes, and then have, come and be a part of that
Public
process.
hearing presentation.
Yeah, I think I can do that.
You are your designee,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Have to be the change.
It's a bit of-
You can bring anybody you want, Drew. You appoint anybody.
The hearing, yeah.
We should send
That's
it
the
to
fourth, that's the 4th hearing.
No,
4th hearing, that right?
It is the point, you're,
it is.
Tired.
It's gonna be a very long meeting.
So, planning commission, do you feel like you got the direction that you needed? city council on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably gonna wait at least until legal.
You got some hurdles.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But when it comes to the work, once we're to that point, do you feel like you have some good direction now?
And we can
I
return
think
it.
we have a good start. I think maybe we come up with a first draft. Maybe we
Sit down
can
again.
talk to you guys, whether it's all of you or a few of you, especially when it comes to those actual numbers. Kind of feel like
Yeah.
it's gonna be a little fill in the blank. Like, here's the language, but we've got some variables that we'd like to
yeah,
talk about with you guys.
Like with my-
Speaking for myself,
Yeah.
as planning commission member, dictating financial things feels like out of our jurisdiction. So I feel like we're pretty comfortable coming up with the language, but when it comes to the actual numbers,
Fair enough.
I like that idea though, that we can essentially draft the code, but have some like options. Like, you know, it could be this, or this.
maybe give you a
Percent.
range.
Right.
or-
Yeah, we give you a range and here's the math of how that works out.
Yeah.
And you guys can
Massage it.
dial that in
Okay.
and let us know.
I think that's real viable.
I'd be apprehensive to put, to your point, anything until after a feasibility study too, to actually give us some data to work on.
I think that if the attorney gives you a yellow light, it's a good sign.
So the Nexus would give us that number. Feasibility is just impact. It's
Right.
essentially an impact study that says like, how will developers react? And so and what will happen to the market economy and where will the cost transition? Because cost will always transition to, somewhere. So that's the feasibility, but if we have, so I don't think we want to do a dual study. Maggie, you probably don't want to pay for 2 studies out of that budget, but
Well, I'm just wondering how a feasibility study would really be helpful. It would be more of like the nexus, like where's the threshold for what we're trying to develop?
I think that's what we we want to frame it as that Nexus study and feasibility, like, we know there's impact. The impact is, we're okay, kind of,
Yeah, I mean,
we're accepting it.
last thing we wanna do is hinder growth, right? Development, so we don't want to.
But we also want to maximize
Right,
Revenue,
funds.
yeah.
funds. Find that sweet spot.
Right,
Mhm.
Sweet
and
spot.
I'm not gonna be able.
And remember, if they're affordable, they don't have to worry about it, so.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry that we're gonna make it more difficult, because we're taking care of that with these funds.
Isn't the fact that whole thing that interest rates are going down should help the construction district then?
Nominally,
That's, yeah.
but it's, I mean, we
Long-term.
are high for everybody that's, you know, in the business now, so those numbers are gonna have to correct quite largely for it to start really penciling to, you know, jump back into it major.
And our construction doesn't respond to price pressure. Like, we're in an inelastic market, right? Like, we're constrained by size and where people can build. And also,
Available.
yeah, there's like,
Remember that time before 1986 when interest rates were 17% for a house and everybody was
happy.
But the house cost 22,000.
Houses cost 22,000 and median income was like 24,000.
Nailed it, I mean, that's so.
And now it's
So-
like, oh,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
houses cost more than 10 times.
There are more
median
millionaires in this
income,
country than
so
there are
it's a
middle
way
class
bigger
right now.
difference.
It's-
All right. I think we're done.
Sweet.
Were we gonna do docket stuff?
No,
Okay.
January.
that was time permitting, we used our time. We had another meeting before this, we're done.
All right, for planning, I think we need to adjourn.
Just sat down
Second.
to each other, buying a couple of extra.
I think Al-
That makes sense, cool.
We can adjourn.
Yeah.
Oh. Daily.
I'm to adjourn.
Because like I can't go.
Moved by hand, seconded by Dave, all those,
Alex gone.
raise your hand.
You forget to actually.
You want to adjourn, raise your
Shane
hand.
voted.
January, yeah.
We're- we're-
I'm still here.
When somebody says, then you have